Good day, Mason here. Today we're going to be making toad in the hole, which is essentially sausage with Yorkshire pudding. And I'm also going to be making a bit of an onion gravy to pour on top of it. So stay tuned for our next adventure. Our ingredients for this adventure consist of 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 cups of flour, 2 cups of milk, or in my case, cream, because I was out of milk, unfortunately. 5 eggs, oil, and sausage. I chose a local sausage from my local butcher, and the stuff is quite good. Okay, time to start. Mixing bowl, sifter on top. We're just going to sift our flour. We don't want any oddballs in this, so we want to have a nice, pure, fluffed up flour. Then we can toss in our salt, and then we're just going to give this a quick mix. Milk or cream both work great in this recipe. I was using cream because I was out of milk, like I said earlier, but it really made it really rich. So we'll just dump that in right now, and then we'll just give that a little bit of a stir. But this recipe is very flexible in the way you want to make it. And if you change the moisture to flour ratio or dry to wet ratio, you can really change how this recipe turns out. It's starting to really thicken up now, so I'm going to add the eggs in. And then it should get back to a creamy mixture once I stir it some more. The other thing with this recipe is that if you don't add any sugar, it's more savory. That's kind of the way I like it. It's more of a savory dish, but if you add a couple tablespoons of sugar, it can be more of a sweet thing. And the way that it ends up coming out too, it's pretty close to like the consistency of like pancakes. So it's almost like having pancakes with sausage, which is amazing. Much more of a normal meal than the location I'm from. That's a pretty popular breakfast, is sausage and pancakes, but over in across the pond, I guess this is more the thing to do, and we don't really see it that often here in the colonies. So we'll just set that aside for about half an hour to rest. Okay, now we're sometime in the future, so this is the pan I'm going to be using, and we'll just toss our sausage inside of the pan. It's probably best to separate the sausages so they're not all connected to each other. And then we can add our oil in. Now we just need to get a little bit of a covering on the bottom of the pan, and I was a little bit too aggressive and put a little bit too much oil in, so copy what I did, just stop a little bit earlier. Now we're going to stick this in the oven at 450 degrees and cook it for about 10 minutes. We want our oil to be nice and hot for the next step. Something that goes really well with this type of dish is gravy. And traditionally, I believe a onion gravy is the traditional preferred kind. So I'm just going to slice up this onion here nice and small, and we're going to use that as the basis for making our delicious gravy to go with our fabulous toad in the hole. And now that our onions are all chopped up, we can start the process. So we'll get a saucepan on the stove, crank our heat nice and high, and then we'll proceed to add our onions to the bowl. Of course, we want a little bit more than just this in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of oil and butter. Now we'll let that cook away for a little bit. It won't be long till it's time to work on our toad in the hole again. So we can let this just kind of cook away, just kind of playing the waiting game. That's what's good about making your gravy right now. And there my buzzer's going off. And I got my oil and sausage on the stove top, and I'm just going to pour all the batter in. You really want to pull it out, pour your batter in, and get it back into the oven as quick as possible. If you have a stone pan like I do, it is a lot more forgiving. Although I think Yorkshire pudding in general is fairly forgiving, as long as your oil is still hot, but you really want to keep it as hot as possible, and a stone pan really keeps in the heat. So now we can throw that all in the oven. We're going to close the door. We're going to cook that for half an hour. We're not going to open it. We're just going to let it all cook. This is one of those foods that kind of deflates if you open it while it's cooking. It's not as bad as the cakes that do that, but you still want to generally avoid opening the door as much as you can. Meanwhile, we're going to keep cooking our gravy down, seeing as we have half an hour to finish this. That's why it's no big deal to caramelize your onions beforehand. You don't really have to do it like this, but I have time. I'm just waiting for my toad in the hole. So now we can start finishing our gravy. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple more ingredients to it. What we're going to do is we're going to add water first of all. And if you didn't want to do all the caramelized apple stuff, you probably could have done this right from the beginning. So we're going to add a 1.5 cups of water to our onions. Now I'm going to add some bouillon, approximately a bouillon cube worth. Now some chipotle. Just going to throw a couple drops in there. Although the jar is nearly empty, so hardly anything's coming out. So I'm gonna have to double down and use a little bit of Frank's. Now before it gets too hot, we want to add in our flour, which I think I was a little slow on doing because it clumped up a little bit. Now something you can do to prevent your flour from clumping up when you're trying to make gravy is you mix it with the water when it's cold, and then you add your water, which is probably what I should have did because it's lumping up a little bit, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is, and you just gotta roll with the punches sometimes. So another technique that my mother always uses is she uses a small mason jar and puts water in it and then puts the flour in and shakes it a bunch and then pours it in. And doing that usually makes it so that there's no lumps in it whatsoever, which works out pretty good. And another thing, I was using the hot sauce in there to kind of spruce up my gravy. If you're not a fan of hot sauce, or if you want to try something a little bit different, just use barbecue sauce. A little bit of barbecue sauce will go a long way in giving some flavor to your gravy. The other thing I probably should have did was start using a whisk from the start rather than a wooden spoon, because it's easier to beat out the lumps of the flour with a whisk. Adding a little bit of salt and pepper will definitely go a long way to enhancing the flavor of this gravy. Before you know it, everything will all be ready though. I'm just going to accelerate the speed here of our gravy. And once it's done cooking, I just kind of set it aside while I wait for the fabulous meal to be completed, which it is now. So this is freshly out of the oven. You can check doneness with a thermometer if you want. It's probably not necessary. It's pretty high temperature and it's a long cook time, so odds are it will be nice and hot, but doesn't hurt to check, right? So the tricky thing now is figuring out how you get it out of the pan, because it's kind of ridiculous, but I found that if you just work on the side and work your way in, it can kind of come out. You can see why I said those things at the beginning about cutting the sausage apart, because I had a hard time separating the sausage in this pan, as well as a little bit less oil, because there's quite a bit of oil on the bottom of the pan still, which usually there is, but this is probably just a little bit excessive. But this stuff was just amazing. The flavor of this is just outstanding. And of course, make sure you don't forget to pour your gravy on the top, because stuff's better with gravy on the top. I think next time I make this, I'll use smaller sausage, because I think it would be a lot easier to get out of the pan then and make sure all the sausage is separated. But I'm really pleased with the results of this, and I really enjoyed this meal and can highly recommend it. Let me know in the comments below if you've ever heard a toad in the hole. And if you have you had it before? And if you like my content and would like to see more of it, please like and subscribe. And until next time, stay awesome.